That's Nick.
And that's Joseph. And today we're here to talk about Back to Black, the fourth film directed by Sam Taylor Johnson, which Focus Features is releasing in the US on May 17th, 2024. It opens nearly a month ahead of time in the UK.
Do I know a Sam Taylor Johnson movie?
I know you saw 50 Shades of Grey.
Oh.
She directed the first of that trilogy. Her debut was Nowhere Boy, a film about John Lennon, which is where I believe she met her husband, Aaron Taylor Johnson, who also stars in her film previous to this, A Million Little Pieces, which I did not see.
Oh, Aaron Taylor Johnson from that Bullet Train movie?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, okay. I had no idea.
Nocturnal Animals, many things. He's in many things.
What is Back to Black about? The life and music of Amy Winehouse through the journey of adolescence to adulthood and the creation of one of the best-selling albums of our time. I don't think that premise is correct, but...
We really don't tap into the adolescence. So,
no, we'll get to it. What's your pull quote?
2 lead performances overcompensate for a somewhat disorderly navigation of the intense but short-lived sensation known as Amy Winehouse. In short, you may be disappointed if you seek Amy.
Mine. Strong performances and beautiful music balance out an oddly told and highly edited story. I'll start with what I liked. I think the performances from the leads, Marisa Abela, who plays Amy Winehouse.
Who's doing her own singing.
That's her singing?
Yeah. Apparently she trained to sing like Amy Winehouse.
I thought she did a fantastic job.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't realize that was Jack O'Connell.
Yeah. I'm fans of Jack O'Connell. I love him in Startup, but he's been in a lot of good stuff.
I thought he was really great in this.
Mm-hmm.
And Lesley Manville plays Amy Winehouse's grandmother.
Yes.
I thought she did a great job.
She's always a class act. We recently reviewed her in Mrs. Harris Goes to Paris.
And of course the music's fantastic. I really liked the cinematography.
Mm-hmm. Polly Morgan, you've seen a lot of her work too. She recently lends The Woman King, Quiet Place 2, and Where the Crawdads Sing.
So I think this is a very well put together film. But the story is confusing to me. It almost feels like maybe there's like a 2-hour, 45-minute version that whomever was in charge, like maybe the family, the dad, saw that and said, cut this out, cut that out. And so what we're left with is a really like odd telling of a person who's like the end of their life was highly publicized.
Yeah.
And it kind of hints at things, but...
I mean, you can't get away with telling an Amy Winehouse... With making an Amy Winehouse biopic without... It has to be rated R, which this is. But it also, I think it's trying really hard not to be misery porn and try to highlight her as a person. And I get that, but there are several moments like the kind of transition where she's missing a tooth, I think is one like, well, how did that happen? What kind of an effect does that have? And I think the swift decline that was caused, at least as pointed to in this biopic, from her relationship with Blake and their drug use and their kind of cohabitation issues. It just feels like a really swift descent, and we don't really get to a chance to examine that.
I made a list of the things that I feel like we don't talk about or are hinted at. Her bulimia.
All right.
We see that she is vomiting at a point, and then her roommate, I think I don't know who that lady was, her sister or someone living with her is like, well, I don't know, you seem to get sick a lot. Maybe you shouldn't be sick. And then towards the end of the film, Blake tells Amy, like, your bulimia is a problem. So there's that. Then we have, she is very adamant initially that she only likes to drink. And when she sees that Blake does cocaine, she has a very strong opinion about him using cocaine. She does like marijuana. But then all of a sudden, she just starts using crack. Like, someone brings her a couple rocks, and we see her smoking it, and then it's just kind of like, well, is that what she's doing now? We see pipes, and we see a few times, but there's no mention of, like, how that started. You already mentioned the tooth. Mm-hmm. It's just one day the tooth is gone, but then all of a sudden the tooth is back. So, don't know how that happened. Then the opening of the film, we see she has a relationship with her mother. and a contentious relationship with her father. Her father's played by
Eddie Marsan.
But then we only see the mom once in the beginning, and then for the next hour, 30 minutes, it's all about her dad. Like, he's there by her side, he's rooting for her, even though we see her have, like, she seems to feel abandoned by him. But then at the very end, when she wins those 5 Grammys, her mother's there, so we haven't seen the mom in forever. And then it's her mom on stage, and she thanks her mom in her acceptance speech. The dad's in the audience, but he's not even on stage. I was very confused with like what her relationship with her mother was
Well,
like.
it's hinted at that there may be some psychological issues or something, because she's like, mom's not doing well, and then we see mom and she seems physically okay, so what's happening? I don't know.
We see Amy physically assault Blake, and then we hear him say that like, you can't keep hitting me. But then we get mention of Blake self-harming, like he's a cutter, but we never... He only says it like that he stopped doing it, but we never saw him do it. We see him cut up, like, well, but then I assumed that was her beating him up.
Yeah, because he says she likes to scratch.
So I was confused by that.
And she's drunk.
Based on this premise, like, the movie starts with her saying she's 18, and then the movie ends before she dies, and we're told that she died at 27. So the window seems quite small. And then we don't really get an understanding of what her childhood was like, because she seems quite promiscuous, but I didn't get like where that came from. Like, did she have some experiences when she was younger? We don't see her in school. I don't know.
Well, the attachment to her parents is odd. I guess, and I believe the family had approved this project, because I think there have been several projects that have been tried to be made about her, and a documentary from several years ago that I think does a little bit better job of kind of showing us who Amy was. But I think that there's something, there's more to be teased out about what's going on with her dad and why he is so carefree, because she even says in the lyrics to Rehab are literally acted out in the film.
Yeah.
Like her manager is telling her she has to go, and the dad's like, I think she's fine.
Then we see or are told that she had, I think, what is a seizure? More than once. Well, one time she's like passed out, and her manager's like, I think you had, I forget what he calls it, but I guess would amount to a seizure. And then towards the end, we're told that she had a fit. Like Blake heard on the news that she had a fit. So I guess another seizure. But we really don't, we don't really get a sense of how the drugs and alcohol are affecting her health. We just see that she looks worse for wear, and she appears to lose weight at a point. I thought the makeup and styling of that actor was very good, because when she looked rough, she did look rough. So I'm just gonna go through my notes. Her relationship with her grandmother is really sweet, and we see that Amy tells us her grandmother's her style icon, and her grandmother has this little box of pictures from like back in the day, and Amy asks her grandma, "Can I have the box?" And then we see her like sort of forget them in a cab once.
Her
dad's cab. Who the dad drives that same cab the entire movie. But his daughter's rich now. He's still driving that same cab. And then we see her like when she gets home with the box, she just kind of throws it in the stairwell. And then we don't see that box again until the very end of the movie. I was expecting that to have more. I almost thought that those pictures were going to tell a story. Like that was going to be how they build the narrative. But it was just whatever. We also hear that Amy likes to have a drink called a Rockstasy.
I'd never heard of that. But
That drink is comprised of Southern Comfort, vodka, Bailey's Irish Cream, and banana liqueur. And we see the bartender give it to her, and that shit looks so disgusting.
that looks like it's a recipe to look like Ipecac.
My favorite scene might be when Amy first meets Blake.
Yeah.
Because this is after she's been called into the record label, and they're telling her like, listen, we think like you need to work on your stage presence, maybe your look. And she like blows up. So she's like, I'm done. I'm taking a break to go live life. I'm out of here. And then we see her sitting in a bar, and Blake walks in, and he's quite the character. And at first I was concerned like, oh, he's going to be a little too rough around the edges. but he is so charming and sweet. And there's a moment when they're talking about music, and he knows her music, and he's being very upfront about it. He's singing her songs, and then he tells her, "Oh, do you know the Shangri-Las?" She doesn't. And he's like, "Oh, well, guess what we're about to play." And I thought he was so cute singing
Leader of the pack.
Leader of the Pack. And then all of a sudden, this lady named Becky walks in. And Becky is Blake's girlfriend. So, of course, Amy's devastated. But I thought that was a really good moment. It's a sad moment, is when Amy and her grandma go for a walk, like their usual, I guess, picnic. And the grandma has to tell Amy she has lung cancer. So that was pretty emotional.
Yeah, I think that it's overall it's a capably directed film. I just think how it's kind of all assembled doesn't work. But there are a couple moments that are pretty that are emotionally authentic.
The grandma mentions Charlie Parker a few times, and then tells Amy to go, when she goes to New York for the first time, to go visit, I think, a club that Charlie Parker used to play in.
Birdland.
Who was a jazz musician. I kind of wish that would have been more explained, like her influences. She does say all the people she liked, including like Lauryn Hill, Ella Fitzgerald. But it's curious that, this is, 2 hour plus, a little change. And the person who we're profiling had a short life. And the span of her career is short. So you think, if you compare that to these sweeping biopics like Respect, it's kind of odd that this film seems to omit a lot, even though the time frame is short. And I think I didn't need them to show her at rock bottom. But then if we're not then the other side of that is I would have loved to hear more about her influences. The premise I got from IMDb says that we're going to learn about the creation of one of the best-selling albums of our time. First of all, the film doesn't tell us that it's one of the best-selling albums. It says that she's the highest charting female British artist in the US in history. But we hear her recording.
We hear her recording Back to Black.
Back to Black. And I think that's it.
Yeah.
And there's no mention of her songwriting process. I mean, anything. The opening of the film is her at 18. And I think she's upset about some boys, or her mom tells her, "Oh, two guys have been calling for you." And she immediately writes a song about it. And of course, the music's beautiful.
It's clear that she takes her influences for her music from actual life events and her actual feelings. And I think that comes across in nearly all of her songs. You can sense that, as opposed to, we often talk about Celine Dion and did you have
These aren't lived-in experiences.
These aren't lived-in experiences. And Amy Winehouse very much had that, which I think is what people responded to. I mean, I had that album. I listened to it. I listened to Back to Black a lot in 2007. And I actually had tickets to see her in a canceled show in Minneapolis. But
I'm not that familiar with her work. I did recognize 3 or 4 songs in the movie. So I think, as someone who... I obviously know who she is and knew that she had issues, but I think if someone's not very well versed, or maybe doesn't even know who this woman is, I don't know that you would, after watching this film, I don't know that a person would understand the magnitude of her success from that album and how much tabloid fodder she provided.
There's a lot.
In the film, we see her constantly being photographed by paparazzi, but it's also at her, she seems to occupy... the space she lives in doesn't really change as her career gets bigger.
Right. But it seems like no one's really also looking out for her, which Whitney Houston, I think, went through that too. At a point, it's there's no one that's trying to shield you from any of this.
Or can shield you.
Or can,
right?
yeah.
Because also, it's Michael Jackson. He was so rich and famous that it's people did try, but you can't tell him what to do. He can just vanish. And so, I don't know. Getting back to silly stuff, I thought Amy Winehouse, her hair, when she starts to do the updo, certain angles, it looked like there's a big octopus on her head.
Yeah.
And then she likes to wear these ballet flats. And at one point, when Blake gets arrested for assaulting a bar manager, she's fully cracked out and looking crazy, and she runs out into the street as the police are taking him away, and she loses one of her ballet flats like Cinderella, and that thing looks so dirty.
It looked so dirty. I was like, please don't let anybody pick that up.
And that was the first thing I thought, is I know someone's gonna pick that nasty ass flat up. Amy in this movie stayed drinking. What did we just watch where the female lead was smoking all the time?
Meryl Streep and Silkwood.
Yeah.
But also, she references Bukowski and Hunter S. Thompson.
Yes.
And I think that exemplifies the danger of, you can admire troubled artists, but you shouldn't also realize that trying to emulate or copy what they did is probably a mistake. But it's funny because you also recently watched Barfly with Mickey Rourke playing a version of Bukowski. But
so we are told that, or we get the sense that Back to Black is inspired by her failed relationship with Blake, because we see that they get together and then ultimately he decides to break up with her because she's violent and egotistical and he doesn't want to compete with her fame, and he's convinced that she'll just end up dating a famous guy. So he goes back to his old girlfriend Becky, and of course Amy's devastated, and that's the inspiration for the record. But then they get back together, and I thought that their relationship, I need a little bit more, because initially it looks like Blake's friend convinces him to call Amy because now that she's rich and famous, maybe he can get some money. And it didn't seem like Blake was like, yeah, I could.
yeah, I could use her. That's what it felt like.
Child, when he texts Amy, she's at her grandmother's like mausoleum. And when she gets that text,
You've never seen her so happy.
it reminds me of when Bruce has that joke about the Krispy Kreme light, like hot and ready, and how he'll crash his car trying to get those fresh donuts. That's how she looked running back to Blake. And then they immediately go get married. So I didn't get a sense of whether or not anyone thought that their relationship was genuine at that point.
Right. And I think what the film doesn't do, and I think this is actually because the actors have pretty good chemistry, is showing their degradation, their mutual degradation for one another. It's spelled out to us directly when Jack O'Connell says to her on that prison visit, I'm leaving you, and here are all the reasons why, and I'm going to tick off all these things that the movie didn't bother to show or explain, like the bulimia.
Yeah, I was disappointed in the jail visitation scene, because he says, I'm clean now, and he doesn't sound happy about it, but he's clean, and he's in therapy, and now he understands why their relationship is toxic, so for his own health, they need to break up. And like you said, he lists like all the things that we didn't really see. That just felt like, for a movie that's, the name of the movie is the name of this epic album that won 5 Grammys and all the accolades, and he's this relationship's the inspiration. I feel like they kind of just leave us hanging with how profound it was for her.
Well, and how jarring. So, this album comes out, and we know the inspirations for some of the tracks, but she has to keep singing them because she has the documentary about her goes into this a little bit more, about how she's kind of stuck in the energy of this album and what the songs are about, and having to perform them over and over again.
She can't escape
She can't escape them, even though things have moved on. She got back with him. They got married, and then they break up again, and then she ends up having to go to rehab, and then
she gets sober,
but she still has to go back to this album, which was lightning in a bottle at one point in her life. She's young, and I think that the sense of having to kind of jostle back and forth those things would have been an interesting thing to try to understand.
So I think all of the live performances look really great. I really like the production value. We see her during the Grammys when she won 5, and she does sort of a live telecast, performs Rehab for the first time in the film. I thought that was done really well. And then after that, we see that she's gotten sober, seems kind of stoic, and then she goes outside to say goodbye. She's moved into like a really nice house now, and she goes outside to say goodbye to her dad, who came for a visit, and the paparazzi, of course, is trying to get pictures of her, and one of them says, oh, do you have anything to say about Blake and his new girlfriend and their baby? And then that was another thing that gets brought up several times that I should have added to my list, is her wanting kids. Mm-hmm. We see a moment where she takes a pregnancy test and it's negative, but we don't get a sense of like, have you had trouble getting pregnant, or is this...
Are there talks about why you may be having trouble?
And maybe why, because your health is not where it should be. Mm-hmm. Like, there's none of that. It's just like we see that she took one test, it was negative, and she's crying. Mm-hmm. And then hearing that Blake now has a kid with some other woman seems to make her sad. And then she puts on
Shangri-La's.
And then she's singing, and then the movie ends, and then all we get is some copy saying that she died in 2011. Mm-hmm. So I don't know.
Based having alcohol poisoning after
a long bout of sobriety. Well, to her it felt like a bout, I'm sure. But yeah, you made a good point, because we had heard people saying negative things about the film and saying that it felt formulaic. And I don't know that I think it feels formulaic. And in some ways, I wish it were more formulaic, like giving us timelines, because I was not well oriented with where we were in her life at certain points, or her fame.
I just think it's almost impossible to direct a biopic that's comprehensive but also nuanced, and I don't know. You're not going to please everybody, and I think a lot of negative press about it might be for the diehards. For Amy Winehouse, well, I don't know. I think that it's worth seeing for the two leads, who I think allow you to kind of disappear into this world long enough to not be completely taken out of it all the time. I think Marisa Abela is a lot... She kept reminding me of either Rachel Weisz or Zoe Lister-Jones.
Oh, I thought she reminded me of if you mix Britney Spears and Fran Drescher.
Wow. But I liked her. I think she had a nice screen presence, and I think does the essence of Amy justice enough.
I liked her and Blake, like those portrayals. I think I liked more than the actual people.
I don't know. I have fond memories of that album and the initial kind of elation at the just outright rebellion of this woman against the industry, but eventually kind of gets in her own way and can't get out of it.
Based on this film and how it was put together, I almost think a better story or a better approach would have been to start the film with her Grammys performance and winning the 5 Grammys, and then sort of the aftermath of that, like you mentioned, her having to sing these songs even though she's not in that space anymore, so maybe it's difficult for her to move on. And then we sort of get how, because it seems like life was going well for her, and then it's just like, oh, she was sober for a long time and then died from alcohol poisoning. Mm-hmm. So I kind of wish that we would have gotten that little gap, right? Like 2 or 3 years, I don't know how long it was. But what would you give Back to Black? I
would give it 2.5.
I think it's fine. I would give it 2.5 out of 5. Mm-hmm. Join us on Patreon and listen to our podcast. Bye.